It was an ordinary day at the garage when two police officers pulled up in their patrol car. Their crisp blue uniforms stood out starkly against the grime and grease of my workspace. I crouched beneath a car lift, pretending to tinker with a truck, watching them approach. It wasn't unusual for officers to visit. Sometimes it was about a car theft. Other times they just needed help with their vehicles. But today, their cheerful expressions seemed oddly out of place. "Mr. Grayson?" one of them called out, spotting me. I stood, wiping my hands on an oily rag. "That's me. What's this about?" Their smiles vanished in an instant. "We need to talk to you about your wife," the taller officer said grimly. "She's been injured at your home and is currently in the hospital. That's all we can say for now." The words hit me like a truck. Kate was hurt? At home? My mind raced with questions, but before I could voice them, the officer continued. "Before you leave, we need to know your whereabouts for the past 3 hours." I blinked, thrown by the sudden shift in tone. "I've been here all day, except for a quick coffee run around 11 o'clock. You can ask my mechanics Mike and Pete. They'll vouch for me." One officer nodded and walked off to speak to them, while the other pulled out a notepad. "What coffee shop?" "Joe's Coffee, just down the road," I replied, frowning. "Could you show us your vehicle?" "Of course." I led him outside to my truck. He inspected it thoroughly, checking the tires, the interior, even the bed, before finally giving a nod. "You're clear to go, but stay in touch, we may have more questions." Heart pounding, I jumped into my truck and headed to the hospital. The hospital was a maze of sterile hallways and muted chaos. A nurse directed me to the surgical wing, where a doctor briefed me about Kate's condition. "She sustained significant injuries," he explained, his tone oddly detached. "She's undergoing surgery and receiving a blood transfusion. We're doing everything we can." His half-smile felt inappropriate, almost mocking. I nodded numbly, my mind spinning. How had this happened? What injuries? And why was she home in the first place? After lingering in the waiting area, the same officers from earlier intercepted me. They suggested getting coffee in the cafeteria, where the questioning resumed. "What's your relationship with your wife like?" the shorter officer asked, sipping his cup. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Kate and I have been married for 8 years. She's an attorney, successful, hardworking. We've been trying for a baby. She recently left her job to focus on that." "And how's your marriage? Any problems?" I shook my head. "We're solid. Sure, there's stress, it's a big life change, but we love each other. We're excited about starting a family." "Do you know a John Barton?" the question threw me. "No. Should I?" The officers exchanged glances but didn't elaborate. They left shortly after, leaving me with more questions than answers. The morning of betrayal, the morning had started like any other. I'd arrived at the garage early, checking on ongoing repairs and chatting with Mike and Pete. But by mid-morning, my thoughts drifted to Kate. Since leaving her job, she'd seemed different, withdrawn, moody, distant. Our intimacy had dwindled to almost nothing. I'd chalked it up to nerves about the future, but deep down, I felt something was off. Determined to reconnect, I decided to surprise her by coming home early. "I'm heading out for a bit," I told Pete, who was tightening a bolt on a customer's car. "Hold down the fort." "Sure thing, boss. Can you test drive the sedan before you go?" "Later," I said, already halfway out the door. The drive home was filled with anticipation. I imagined surprising Kate, making her laugh, and maybe reigniting the spark we'd lost. But as I pulled into the driveway, my heart sank. An unfamiliar car was parked outside. I sat in my truck, staring at the vehicle. Maybe it was a friend or a delivery driver. Clinging to that hope, I walked to the front door and stepped inside. The unmistakable sounds of intimacy hit me like a punch to the gut. Laughter, moans, whispers coming from upstairs. My legs felt like lead as I climbed the staircase, each step heavier than the last. Outside the bedroom door, I froze. The sounds were louder now, undeniable. My wife, my Kate, was with someone else. My hand trembled as I pulled out my phone and pressed record. Peeking through the slightly open door, I saw them, Kate and a man I didn't recognize, tangled together in our bed. The plan, every instinct screamed at me to burst in, to confront them, to let my anger out in a storm of fists and fury. But something stopped me. Reacting emotionally would only make things worse for me, for them, for everyone. I retreated downstairs, slumping onto the sofa. My mind raced, alternating between heartbreak and cold calculation. I needed to act, but how? That's when I remembered the stun grenade. A relic from my time in the Army Reserve. It was designed for hostage rescue missions, harmless but incredibly disorienting. It was perfect. I retrieved the device from my workshop and modified it, attaching a rope for easy placement. With my plan in place, I headed back upstairs. The confrontation, the sounds of betrayal were still echoing as I entered the room. Neither of them noticed me. Calmly, I secured the grenade to the light fixture, pulled the pin, and walked out, shutting the door behind me. Even with my ears covered and eyes closed, the explosion was deafening. The house shook, and screams erupted from the bedroom. When I re-entered, the scene was chaotic. The man lay on the bed, clutching his groin and writhing in pain. Kate was on the floor, her eyes wide with shock. Something glinted on the carpet, a severed piece of flesh. Realization dawned, and I quickly disposed of it in the downstairs toilet. Kate stumbled to the bathroom, vomiting into the toilet. I didn't follow. I didn't care anymore. Aftermath and police arrival back at the garage. I called Mike and Pete. "If anyone asks, I've been here all day," I said urgently. "Sure, boss. What's going on?" "Just cover for me," I said, my voice cracking. I changed into my overalls and smeared grease on my hands and face, preparing for the inevitable arrival of the police. When they showed up, I stuck to my story. Mike and Pete backed me up without hesitation. As the officers questioned me, I thought about Kate. The woman I had loved, trusted, and planned a future with had betrayed me in the worst way possible. Yet, despite everything, I couldn't shake the guilt over how far I'd gone in my quest for revenge. Reflections sitting alone in the garage that night, I replayed the day's events in my mind. The betrayal, the confrontation, the chaos, it all felt surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake from. The officers would likely come back with more questions. The man might press charges. Kate might never forgive me. But in those quiet moments, I realized one thing. I didn't need her forgiveness, nor did I want it. She'd shattered something irreparable, and I had acted out of pure instinct, for better or worse. As dawn broke, I stared out at the empty street, wondering if this was truly the end or just the beginning of something far darker. The guys stared at me, stunned, as I briefly recounted the recent events. Mike was the first to break, managing to hold it together for only 15 seconds before bursting into laughter. That set off Pete, and soon we were all howling uncontrollably. It took a full 5 minutes before we regained composure, wiping tears from our eyes and clutching our stomachs. In those moments of camaraderie, the tension I'd been carrying began to lift. After exchanging handshakes and promises of support, they returned to their oily workspaces, leaving me standing in the break room. Yet, over the next hour, spontaneous laughter echoed from the various dingy rooms. The sounds reminded me that even in the worst moments of our lives, humor has a way of cutting through the darkness. But this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Meanwhile, my wife, Kate, was about to face the consequences of her actions, the one she so carefully avoided acknowledging. That evening, I decided to channel my emotions into something productive. I busied myself cleaning the master bedroom, a place that had become a battleground for my trust and dignity. I scrubbed the bathroom floor with such vigor that my arms ached. I discarded the bedding, stripping away the remnants of shared moments that now felt tainted. The rug, once a cozy accent to our room, was tossed into a garbage bag without hesitation. The torn curtains dangled as if mocking me, a reminder of the chaos I had unleashed just hours earlier. Staying busy kept my mind from spiraling, but the distractions outside were relentless. Incessant phone calls buzzed through the houses, and relentless knocking on the door became a drumbeat I couldn't ignore. The media frenzy had descended like vultures, drawn by the irresistible scandal of infidelity and its bizarre, almost poetic twist. I cracked open the door once, only to see flashing cameras and eager reporters shouting questions I had no intention of answering. Slamming it shut, I turned off my phone and let the silence envelop me. Finally, with no distractions, I had time to reflect. Did I regret what I had done? Surprisingly, no. I despised cheaters and had seen firsthand how betrayal could transform even the kindest souls into hollow versions of themselves. My friends and family had fallen victim to it, and I'd always promised myself I'd never allow someone to take me for a fool. Before this, I'd held the naive belief that Kate shared my disdain for infidelity. I couldn't have been more wrong. Kate's motivations were baffling. By all accounts, she had been as devoted to me as I was to her. Our intimacy had been fulfilling, or so I thought until recently. But looking back, I could pinpoint the moment things shifted. 2 months ago, Kate announced she was retiring early from work to enjoy her last days of freedom before the baby arrived. She said it was her chance to savor independence before motherhood consumed her life. At the time, I believed her. Now, I saw it for what it truly was, a calculated excuse to indulge in her one last thrill. My thoughts were interrupted by my personal cell phone ringing. Only a handful of people had the number, and seeing Kate's parents' name on the caller ID filled me with a mix of dread and exhaustion. "Hello?" I answered, my voice devoid of its usual warmth. After a brief exchange of tense pleasantries, her mother got straight to the point. "Do you know why journalists are camped outside our house?" she demanded. "We'll have to find out eventually, so you might as well tell us now." Her tone was sharp, edged with frustration. I hesitated, grappling with how much to reveal. Finally, I admitted I hadn't seen the news yet. "Well," she sighed heavily, "there's a story about a cheater who bit off her lover's dignity. Does the name Kate ring any bells?" Her words hit me like a freight train. My silence only fueled her frustration, and before I could muster a response, she erupted into a scream of disbelief and abruptly ended the call. The weight of her reaction lingered as I stared at my phone, realizing that my marriage had effectively ended just 8 hours earlier. Still, a part of me craved closure. I needed answers, clarity amidst the chaos. Retrieving the recording device I had left running during the confrontation, I braced myself and pressed play. Listening to their conversation was like pouring salt into an open wound. Kate's lover, a smug and confident man, had begged her to leave me. He promised her a future together, painted in vivid detail. Her response was chilling in its cold logic. "No," she said firmly. I love Dave too much. He's a great husband and will be a great father. This was just one last fling. Her words cut deeper than any knife. She claimed I was her soulmate, yet she lay with another man simply because she missed the thrill. The recording ended with the chaos of that fateful confrontation, a cacophony of shouting, a crash, and finally, silence. For days, I felt nothing but disappointment. Anger simmered beneath the surface, but mostly I felt hollow. The media circus eventually moved on, though the damage had already been done. Even Kate's father called to apologize on her behalf, his voice trembling with shame. But no apology could undo the betrayal. When Kate's lover was finally released from the hospital, reporters uncovered his history as a serial cheater. Though surgeons had managed to repair the damage, they noted that he would likely never regain full functionality. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The final twist came when Sarah, the man's wife, paid me an unexpected visit. She was calm but resolute, her composure a thin veil over the storm brewing inside her. "Do you have any evidence?" she asked, her voice steady. "I need it for my divorce case." Feeling a pang of pity for her, I played the recording. Her husband's pleas and screams filled the room, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of satisfaction cross her face. Before leaving, she turned to me and said, "Thank you. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call." The strangest visit, however, came from the detective assigned to the case. He thanked me for cooperating and hinted that the case might be closed due to insufficient evidence. Before leaving, he paused at the door and turned back with a smirk. "Just one thing," he said. "If I ever come out of retirement, will you tell me how you pulled it off?" I just smiled. Life moved forward, albeit slowly. A letter arrived from Kate while she was still in the hospital. It was a long, rambling apology filled with shame and regret. She begged for forgiveness and offered to sign anything I needed for the divorce. She even asked me to keep her on my health insurance. Her once confident tone was absent, replaced by desperation. The doctors had informed her that part of her tongue had been damaged during the confrontation, a fitting, albeit tragic, irony. Her letter touched me just enough to send her some pajamas to the hospital. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild. I leaned on my friends, especially Mike and Pete, who never failed to lighten the mood. One night, over beers, I recounted the entire ordeal again, this time with a newfound sense of closure. "I owe you guys a keg," I said with a grin. They laughed, clinking their bottles against mine. And in that moment, I realized that even in the face of betrayal, life had a way of offering second chances to laugh, to heal, and to move on. And that's it for today's story. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of emotions, don't forget to like this video. It really helps the channel grow. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss another gripping story like this one. And of course, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let us know what you think about today's tale. Share this video with your friends and family to keep the conversation going. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Take care and stay tuned for more.